A large crowd gathered, and he stayed by the lakeside. Then one of the synagogue officials, Jairus by name, came up and seeing Jesus fell down and pleaded earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is desperately sick. Come and lay your hands on her to make her better and save her life." Jesus went with him, and a large crowd followed, pressing from all sides. Now, there was a woman who had suffered from hemorrhages for 12 years. After long and painful treatment from various doctors, she had spent all she had without getting better. In fact, she was getting worse. She'd heard about Jesus, and she came up behind him in the crowd, and she touched his cloak. "If I can just even touch the hem," she said to herself, "I know I will be well again." Immediately, the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her affliction. Immediately aware that the healing power had gone out from him, Jesus turned to the crowd and he said, "Who touched my clothes?" The disciples said, You see how the crowd is pressing up against you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus continued to look around to see who had done it. Then the woman came forward, frightened and trembling, because she knew what had happened to her. And she fell at Jesus' feet, and she told him the whole truth. "My daughter," Jesus said, "your faith has saved you. Go in peace and be free of your affliction." While Jesus was still speaking, some people arrived from the house of the synagogue official to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why put the teacher to any further trouble?" But Jesus overheard the remark, and he said to the official, "Don't be afraid. Just believe." Jesus allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James's brother John. They came to the official's house, and Jesus noticed all the commotion. There were people weeping and wailing, unrestrained. Jesus went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and crying? The child is not dead. She's merely asleep." At this, they began to ridicule him, and he told everyone to leave. Jesus took the child's mother and father and his own companions, and he entered the room where the child lay. Taking her hand, he said to her, "Talitha, nom," which means, "Little girl, get up." Immediately, the girl, who was 12 years old, got up and began to walk around. Amen.
Speak to us, O God, through your word, that we might hear, that we might understand, and that we might believe. Amen. It is good to be with you here outside today. Thought a cloud. It'll be all right. It's not going to rain. The rain is also a good sign of something or other. When I think of this text, or when I've thought of this text over the years, I've approached it in a lot of different ways. Years ago, I would have exegeted it down to the last jot and tittle and looked at every word and every nuance of the Greek something. I don't do that anymore. When I looked at this in preparation for today, I thought of two words that came to mind to me. Two words which I'm going to briefly talk about. When I say briefly, I mean briefly, because as I said to Ted, I may be accused of a number of things, but one of them is not being a long-winded preacher. And the two words are this: faith and interruption. Faith and interruption. Two words that come to mind as we look at this lesson, today's lesson, about two healings, or in the case of the little girl, a kind of resurrection of sorts. Jesus the healer, we think of him as a healer, is not that screaming miracle worker prancing around on a stage after flying in a $50 million jet, babbling in tongues, falling into trances, jumping up and down. There are no warm-up bands or choirs, no $5,000 silk suits, no wiping of the forehead with an oversized handkerchief. That's not Jesus the healer. Jesus the healer is generally doing something else or going somewhere else when he is confronted by a need. An anguished father with a dying child, a woman who endured, as the new RSV puts it, this one was much kinder, who endured much under many physicians. Every time I read this, I think they didn't have call 888-888-8888 for malpractice insurance, malpractice lawyer. Jesus did not possess God in his healing powers and hold that power in a relationship as a sort of property. It was the faith of the woman, the faith of that injured woman, that despised woman, that sort of woman out there, that made her whole. That crucial component to Jesus' healing is always the faith of the one being healed. Believing that you will be healed is crucial to healing. In any number of healing occasions of Jesus throughout the New Testament, that's the case. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Get up, walk, take your path, all those things. It's still true today. We know that. We know the attitude of a patient is crucial to the healing process. Can't always necessarily figure it out or commoditize it, but it's there. We know that attitude is crucial. You want to get well, you got to kind of believe you're going to get well to some degree or another. And the father of the little girl also believed that Jesus would heal her. Come, lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live. The father's faith. The suffering woman had so much faith that all she needed was to touch Jesus' cloak. If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well. I don't need you to come and talk to me. I don't need you to lay your hands on me. I don't need to do any of that stuff. I just need to sort of touch the hem of your robe, and I'll be made well. You know, the world we live in doesn't put a premium on faith. And what I mean by that is particularly faith in institutions. It's eroded to the point, I mean, you know this as well as I do, to the point where it's often nearly gone. Religious institutions, government institutions, courts, doctors, lawyers, you know what I'm talking about. Those of us who are institutional folks often are having a hard time of it, you know, and understandably so, because the faith that often is projected of what the Christian church is a faith that somebody's like, I don't want any part of that stuff. No, thank you. And frankly, you know, if I were looking at it from that perspective and from that outside, I would be saying exactly the same things. Sometimes we feel, us institutional folks, like we're staring down a mob with torches and pitchforks. People have lost faith in institutions, and again, often rightly so. But Jesus isn't an institution. Jesus isn't an institution, but a person who follows through and who reaches out with love and healing so that those who are touched by him, or often merely in his presence, are made whole. It's a mystery. It's a mystery. Sometimes words don't have to be said. But it doesn't end there either for Jesus, because he calls those who would be his disciples, those of us sitting out here on this beautiful morning, to also be healers and to reach out. You know the drill. To feed the hungry, to stand up for justice, to speak with truth to power. And then we experience that same power that emanated from Jesus. Faith. Faith is a part of this lesson today. The faith of the father for his daughter, the faith of the woman that Jesus would heal her, and the faith of the church today, hopefully, that this Jesus would continue to work the power and presence of his love in the world. Faith. Interruptions. Jesus, on his way to heal the daughter of Jairus, is interrupted by a woman's suffering. Will he get there in time? It's sort of like folks who are kind of last-minute people. This is no shade on anybody, but I'm not a last-minute person. In fact, I'm embarrassingly early for everything. It's like be here for dinner at 6:30, so at 6:20 I'm kind of in front of the house, and I can't really go in at 6:20 because they still may be running a mop somewhere. So I drive around a block 4 or 5 times, and then I get closer. Well, it's 6:27. That'll work. So I'm the opposite. I'm not late, but people are on the way to get somewhere. Oh, get a dinner reservation for 1:45. Well, I need to leave here by 6:25. Okay, and at 20 minutes of 7, somebody's still doing their thing. But anyway, interruptions. Will we get there in time? Jesus, now will we get there in time for my daughter, because this woman is out, looking to be healed. Now, he could have kept going. Jesus could have kept going, but he didn't, because he felt something that says, he felt his power leaving him, whatever that means. And he still could have kept going. Oh, okay. But he stopped. And he had a personal encounter with the woman. And she was healed. He took time, and he accepted the interruption. But they drive us crazy, don't they? They drive me crazy. Maybe from time to time they drove Jesus crazy also. Mark's gospel is full of Jesus being interrupted. In the first chapter, verses 35 to 39, Peter interrupts him while he's at prayer. Peter has a tendency to do all that sort of stuff. He's kind of barges his way into things. Peter had not obviously taken UCC boundary awareness training about his vulnerability. In this same chapter, in the 40th to 45th verse, Jesus is interrupted by a leper when Jesus is preaching in the synagogue. Interrupt his sermon. I don't think anybody's ever interrupted a sermon I've preached. Not yet. But he interrupts a sermon. And then in the second chapter, Jesus is interrupted by a paralytic when he's speaking the word. And of course, in today's lesson, by the woman while on his way to heal the little girl. And then in the 10th chapter, a crowd rebukes a blind beggar when Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem because he interrupts Jesus. All these things. Each time Jesus' divine authority is placed at the service, though, of the desperately needy people. He works into the interruptions. He uses the interruptions. If we're parents, how often have we been interrupted by our children? Just give me 5 minutes when I got home from work. Dad, Mom, all these things. Our small children wanting us to play just when we've sat down after a hard day's at work. Our teen children wanting us to talk. And those we should jump at because it doesn't happen very often. Generally a rare occasion, or needing a ride somewhere if they haven't got their license yet. And preachers get interrupted too, not so much while you're preaching, but, if you're sitting trying to work on a sermon and you don't shut your office door and somebody wants to come in and chat about their day. I was terrible at shutting my office door. I never shut it. Somebody said, you ought to shut the door and say, I am in study time now. Couldn't do that. Somebody would come in and want to chat. Sure enough, I'd chat. Interruptions all the time. Teachers know it. Distracted by students with this or that problem. College professors. Professor, just give me 5 minutes. Well, come to office hour. Need it now. The great teacher Henri Nouwen wrote, you know, my whole life I've been complaining that my work was continually interrupted until I discovered that my interruptions were my work. Till I discovered that my interruptions were my work. Jesus' healing ministry took place during interruptions so often. Unplanned, unprogrammed, but there. Jesus lived out his life not in a straight line from point to point, but in a meandering way as he stopped and started and always reached out with his healing touch, always ready to be interrupted by a need. Maybe for us too, might our interruptions also become our work as Christ's disciples. Amen.